The Goblin Queen's Journey is the latest and greatest Clash Royale update, and it added a lot of new stuff. We got 3 new cards, a new tower troop, a new trophy road, and even a buff to lucky drops.
What?
Among other things as well. But even with that, a good portion of the Clash Royale community still doesn't seem satisfied with this update. And I think I know why that's the case. So let me explain. But first, let's highlight the good, because there was a lot of good stuff in this update, and I feel like it's only fair to highlight the good before I talk about the bad. So honestly, the biggest thing to me is that we got 3 new cards in one update. That is the first time that has happened in a long time. The last update where that happened was 3 years ago in 2021, where we got the Archer Queen, Golden Knight, and Skeleton King all in one update. One general trend that I've kind of noticed in the Clash Royale community, especially among casual players, is that people are always looking for new cards and new exciting ways to play the game with those cards. And with that being the case, this update definitely delivered in a big way. And to be honest, in general, 2024 as a whole has been a great year in terms of new cards in the game. We had the Void, which is a very unique new spell. Of course, we have the 3 new Goblin cards, and then there's also been 3 new Tower Troops, the Cannoneer, the Dagger Duchess, and the Baby Goblins. And yes, I do count Tower Troops as being new cards. Is that wrong? Let me know with a comment. And also, we're not done with new cards either, because the TV Royale episode teased 2 new cards, one of which being a rare and one of which being another champion. Now, the 3 new Goblin cards that were added definitely did have some balancing problems, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But overall, I think they're really fun and really unique cards, definitely adding some value to the game. Next up, the main part of the update, the actual Goblin Queen's Journey. I actually like it. I think it's fun. I honestly like how the Queen and the Baby Goblins are unique to this game mode, because with that, it gives players an incentive to play the game mode, and it keeps all the chaos contained within this one game mode. Like, imagine if the Baby Goblins was in Path of Legends and you're an ultimate champion, and you get Baby Goblins launched at your tower. That wouldn't be fun, right? Also, the rewards are pretty good along the road. You get chests, you get the new cards, and a lot of them to upgrade as well. And then you also get exclusive cosmetics, which is dope. Oh, and then of course you can get the tower troops here as well. That's awesome. This next thing that I like may be a little bit small in the grand scheme of things, but I love how with this they implemented level caps. So in order to unlock the Goblin Queen's Journey, you have to be at Arena 12 in Spooky Town. And I love how they capped it at level 9 for the first arena, because if you're just unlocking it at Spooky Town, you probably don't have level 15 cards that would be viable up here. So I like how they kept it down to level 9, so that way you can get to the gold mines and get through it relatively easy, and then gain progression along the way, so that way you can hopefully be higher level by the time you reach the upper arenas. You know, it accounts for all players, not just the high level people. I like that. I like that. And of course, another thing I like is we have another community event. You know, throw the Baby Goblins, and there's a progress tracker where you get a bunch of rewards, which is awesome. And you know, I've seen some people complaining about this event. Oh, only 2 legendary wildcards, only 2 champion wildcards, and that's barely any gold. Oh my gosh. But I mean, you know, they could just not do this. This doesn't have to be in the game. It doesn't. You know, if you want to keep complaining, they just might stop doing these. Then you won't get anything at all. Is that what you want? Then the last positive thing I want to talk about is that they buffed the lucky drops in this update. Well, it's kind of a buff and a nerf at the same time, but let me explain. So before this update, from a legendary lucky drop, there was a 33% chance to get one of each reward, with that being a legendary book, a book of books, and the 50,000 elite wildcards. But now they have added a 4th reward where you can get a full evolution from the lucky drops. And so that is now 11% chance to get from the legendary lucky drops. And to compensate for that, they nerfed the book of books chance, so that way it's 22%. So that way those two together add up to be 33%. And then the rarities for the legendary book and the 50,000 elite wildcards haven't been changed at all. So even though your book of books chances are a little bit lower, the fact that you could get a full evolution is amazing. I consider that a buff. I love it. All right, so that's all of the good. And to be completely fair, that is a lot of good. There was a lot of good stuff added in this update, but now we got to talk about the bad, because there are some things that need to be addressed. Most of the bad from this update isn't even necessarily related to the things that were added. There is one thing I want to talk about, but most of the bad from this update more so has to do with the current stuff that was in the game that wasn't changed or wasn't fixed, if that makes sense. But the one thing I want to talk about that was bad that was added was the initial balance of the new cards. You know, the Goblin Demolisher was fine, but the Goblin Machine and the Goblin Curse were arguably the 2 best cards in Clash Royale history. Better than Little Prince, better than Monk, better than Phoenix, better than Elixir Golem, better than Night Witch. Yeah, they were that good. Luckily though, it was only for a 48-hour period or so, because Clash Royale did a really good job of responding quickly and giving the 2 cards emergency nerfs, but for those 48 hours, they were the best cards in Clash Royale history. And I want to give Clash Royale credit for being so quick and so responsive and giving these cards emergency nerfs when they desperately needed it, but my big concern is you shouldn't have to emergency balance cards upon release. The cards upon release should be balanced enough to the point where it's not really a problem and they can just exist without the community yelling at the top of their lungs to nerf them. And honestly, this isn't a trend that has only started with this update, but this is a long-lasting trend that spans like the entirety of Clash Royale history almost. Like I mentioned Night Witch in terms of being one of the best cards in Clash Royale history. Upon release, she was absolutely busted. I do not know how that card was approved to be in the game back then. Then moving ahead in like 2019, we had the Elixir Golem. Absolutely ridiculous. The end of 2019 had the craziest meta I have ever seen in this game's history. Then in more recent times, we had the release of card evolutions. All of them were completely busted and they've just now gotten fixed like a year or so later. In terms of actual cards, the Little Prince was absolutely busted. The Cannoneer was on the opposite end of the spectrum at first. He was really weak. The Void Spell was released very strong. Dagger Duchess was very strong. And now the Machine and the the Curse were released really strong. So this isn't just a one-time thing. This is a trend that goes back over 5 years ago. And it just makes me think that whatever their gameplay testing methods have been for this time period, it probably has changed a little bit, but I think it needs to change even more if I'm being honest. Again, props to them for nerfing the 2 cards really quickly, but they shouldn't have been released in that state to begin with. I think the last card that was released that was balanced was the Mighty Miner, and that was at the end of March in 2022, but even then it was a little bit on the weaker side and needed a buff to get to the point where it was considered a good card. All right, now moving on, where we're going to talk about the lack of things that were added / fixed in this update. And I feel like this is the main reason why a part of the community isn't a fan of this update. The Goblin Queen's Journey was a nice, fun addition. It definitely makes the game feel a little bit more fresh, but Clash Royale as a whole is still an incredibly problematic game that is still incredibly flawed in a bunch of areas, and this update didn't really do anything to fix that. There have been strides made, such as the events where we can get free evolutions and things like that. The community events as well that I showed you earlier, those are other good strides. The buff that they just did, the lucky drops, and the existence of lucky drops as a whole, these are all things that have helped the core problems of the game, but the sheer existence of something like the Diamond Pass and the sheer existence of level 15 and how both of them act on a fundamental level, those 2 things alone, amongst other things, will hold the game back until they are overhauled in a substantial way. And I stand by that. Like, the damage that those 2 things have done, I would argue is borderline irreversible. Now, I say borderline irreversible because it's not entirely irreversible. These things still can be fixed, but we have been waiting a year and almost nothing has happened. And until those 2 features get significant changes, I fear that the public perception of the game is going to remain negative for the most part. No matter where I looked on social media regarding the new Goblin Queen's Journey update, whether it was Twitter, whether it was TikTok, whether it was Instagram, or the YouTube comment section of your favorite Clash Royale YouTubers, a majority of the sentiment was still negative, because a lot of people were like, okay, 3 new cards, that's cool. A new trophy road, that's cool. But what about X, Y, and Z? And nothing has happened to X, Y, and Z, even though we got the addition of A, B, and C.
I hate this guy.
I'm going to stop using variables now because I do not like math. And overall, that really sucks to see, because I mentioned earlier, I like the Goblin Queen's Journey update. I do. But seeing the community sentiment just remain negative, it just makes me sad to see. It really does. So another thing I want to talk about with this update really only applies to a very small portion of the community, but that part of the community is still very vocal, so I still feel like this is something that I need to talk about. And that is the fact that this update further supports the notion that Clash Royale is leaning in more of a direction that prioritizes casual players. Like I said, this notion really only affects a small portion of the player base, with those being, of course, the competitive players and the tryhards and the sweats and those people that think they're good because they can line up a magic archer on the princess tower. By the way, you are not good at the game. That's basic tech. And I personally am in favor of casual prioritization because the casual player base makes up 90 to 95% of the people that play your game. But even with that being the case, I do feel like the competition of the game has been whittled down. You know, honestly, quite drastically, I'd be honest. I honestly think evolutions were kind of the start of this, because evolutions definitely take cards and they make them a lot less skillful to use. Like, some cards with evolutions just get so much more value that their skill cap is just reduced by a lot. It's honestly kind of insane to look at. Like, I would argue that in some decks and in some scenarios, the evolved firecracker is considered a win condition because of how far its shots can reach a tower from. And before evolutions, you know, firecracker was still a good card, but you weren't relying on it for tower damage. The same thing kind of applied to the evolved bomber when it was released as well. That thing could hit the tower from the bridge. It was almost like a princess. It was crazy. And then, yeah, I think evolutions are kind of the start of that trend, and we've kind of seen things kind of shift more towards casual prioritization. And I think this update is kind of the pinnacle of that, because this update is purely for fun. There is no competitive value to this update at all. I mean, there is to an extent. It's an extra road where you need to push and get trophies and get to the top to get the exclusive rewards. That adds some competition, but the nature of the tower troop existing and things like that, it whittles down the competition a lot. And also the new cards, I think, cater to casuals as well. I mean, they're all relatively easy to use. They're not high skill cap cards at all. I mean, the Goblin Demolisher, it just explodes every second it can. The Goblin Curse turns cards into goblins. It's a Mother Witch for 2 elixir, but turns cards into pigs instead of, or goblins instead of pigs. And then the machine is just a walking fireball that also has the health of a Valkyrie. That isn't really skillful. Now, again, to reiterate, I'm in favor of pushing this notion. I think making the game as fun as possible for casual players is the best thing possible. But there is going to be a very, very, very vocal section of the community that will not like this. And I honestly think that's where some of the negative sentiment around this update comes from. And to an extent, I do think it is justified. I feel like I just rambled so much there, but I hope that made sense. I guess the last thing I want to touch on briefly, 2 more things that a lot of people, I think, were expecting or hoping for changes with were Clan Wars and Star Points. Like, Clan Wars 2 has remained unchanged since 2021, and its relevancy is probably at an all-time low. I mean, I do Clan Wars occasionally on my free-to-play account because it is a solid progression on a weekly basis, but it really does feel like a chore. And then Star Points have practically been neglected since they were introduced into the game. Again, the last change with them was back in 2021, where they lowered the requirement where you could start using them. And the last Star Point skin I think we got was the Mother Witch. And again, that was back in like early 2021 or so. So they've been useless almost forever. And I think a lot of people really want some additional cosmetic elements, you know, to go with cards. Like, tower skins are cool, emotes are cool, but people want skins for troops, I can tell you that. Evolutions kind of act as a skin, but it is a temporary skin, and they're kind of hard to get as well. But, you know, like the other 3 relevant Supercell games, they all have some sort of skin cosmetics for characters. Brawl Stars, every brawler has skins. For Clash of Clans, you have sceneries, which are cool, and then your heroes have skins as well. And then in Squad Busters, in their recent update, they actually added skins, and I think that's pretty cool. Now, to be honest, did I really expect any changes to Clan Wars or any changes to Star Points? Not really, but would it have been nice to get a little bit of something for these neglected features? Yes, absolutely. I remember when Star Points came out, they were such a hype addition to the game, and then like nothing happened. And then Clan Wars 2 has kind of always been underwhelming, but that's a video for another day. So overall, how do I rate the Goblin Queen's Journey update? I rate it a 7.5 out of 10. As a whole, I think it is a good, solid update. I think it's a fun new addition to the game. The 3 new cards are super fun and super unique as well. But even with that being the case, as I talked about, there were still a lot of things that were lacking from this update that did not address the core issues of the game. And even though I think this update will help Clash Royale in the short term, especially since it's summer and a lot of people are out of school and on vacations and are looking for extra things to do, I think Clash Royale will have a slight surge in popularity over the course of the next couple of months. So short term, this update will help, but I think for long term, looking years in advance, there are still a bunch of fundamental issues with this game that need to be fixed as soon as possible. And I hope that that is something we can look forward to for the update at the end of the year, which should be around October and November. So that's going to be it for this video. Let me know what you think about my ramblings with a comment down below. I'd really appreciate it. Leave a like, subscribe, do all that. Watch the video on the screen. You guys know the drill. See you all in the next one. Peace out.